Thanks, Sam. Morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. Well, those of you that I can see, I'd like to see a few more pictures if people are willing to come onto audio. That'd be brilliant. What I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to talk about some of the HR challenges that companies are facing, but also flexible furlough, because that's the most recent introduction. There's quite a lot of information, so what I've done is I've just put together a quick presentation so that I can talk around it. The information that I'm going to share with you is actually all lifted from the Gov website, so it's there, it's readily available for everybody. So I'm going to talk for about 10-15 minutes initially, and then I'll open it up to Q&As. And I know that Jade in the background is sort of fielding all the questions, etc. So by all means, do raise any questions you've got, and I'll try and answer them as best I can at the end of the presentation. So bear with me whilst I just try to share this screen with you. And it won't work. Here we go. Come on. Right, can everybody see that? Is that okay? Brilliant. Okay, so flexible furlough. Changes to the flexible furlough scheme. So the changes include, from the 10th of June, the last day employers can put a person on furlough for the first time. So that doesn't mean someone who's already been on furlough has come back to work, because technically what's happened there is they're already registered under the HMRC scheme. So the HMRC are happy with that. What you can't do is someone brand new, put them on furlough, unless it's someone who's returning from maternity, shared parental leave, adoption, paternity, or parental bereavement leave. They're the only people who can be furloughed for the first time after the 10th of June. However, in order to do that, the company must have previously submitted a claim for another employee for a period of 3 weeks over those dates that I've just said there, the 1st of March and the 30th of June. Okay. Employees started maternity, paternity, etc. before June and have returned after the 10th of June. Company included on the RTI submission on or before the 19th of March. And there are no grant changes in June and July. Okay. And at this moment in time, the government guidance is, or they're insistent that they're going to close this scheme in October or at the end of October. What I would say is things are changing so much. Further reports today about the unemployment rate, etc. Lots and lots of uncertainty about the hospitality industry, etc. Retail went back yesterday. There's an awful lot out there. I would watch this space and see whether or not that date gets extended or something different is introduced. So flexible furlough, employees can work part of the week and be furloughed for the remainder of the week. So what that basically means is it is possible for someone to come and work, let's say 2 days a week, and then you furlough them for the remainder of the 3 days. The maximum, again, the government at the moment will actually cover is the 80%. Anything over and above that is for you to decide on anyway. So yeah, it is possible if someone works 4 days a week for them to be furloughed for 4 days and them to work 1 day. It really is up to the company as to what they decide, what they want to do and how they want to do it. There are no guidance rules. There's no support in how you can and can't do this. It very much is going to be determined by the business needs. There are clear rules as to what payments are to be made by the company via the furlough scheme. The calculations are quite complex. I had to look at them over the weekend, and it is quite difficult. However, there are a couple of examples, quite detailed examples on the Gov website, which I would urge you to go and look at. The writing itself is very... there's just an awful lot of information there, and it's just a great big chunk of information, but if you sort of cut and paste it and break it down, a lot of it does make sense. If you do flexibly furlough employees, you've got to remember you will need a written agreement between you and the individual to confirm the new furlough arrangement. You can't just say, I'm going to do this to you. They've got to actually agree to it. In the same way, you needed the individuals to agree to being furloughed in the first place. If, as a business, you decide, well, actually, we don't want to take opportunity of the flexible furlough scheme, etc., then that's fine. You can keep someone on furlough, as in the 80%, for the whole period, if you like. But remember, and I will go on to this in a short while, is that the payments that the government is going to make the contribution towards will be reducing, especially through September and October. So what are the changes? 1st of July, from this date, flexible furlough starts. So everything stays exactly as it is for now, but the employers can bring furloughed employees back to work for any amount of time and any shift pattern while still being able to claim the grant for the hours not worked. Flexible furlough arrangements can last any amount of time, but must now be for a minimum of 7 days. So up until the end of June, a minimum period is 3 weeks, so 21 calendar days. And that's why you had the deadline date of the 10th of June for anyone new being introduced onto the furlough scheme, other than those that I've already mentioned. But from 1st of July, that's now going to be reduced to at least a week. So each period has to be for at least a week. From the 1st of August, employers will then need to start paying the employer's NIC and the pension contributions as well. And I think even that small change is going to have a major impact on some organisations. Companies for the last few months haven't had to actually pay or think about those sort of costs to the business, but that certainly will have an impact on their outgoings. From the 1st of September, this is where things really do start getting ramped up. And this, again, will have a major effect on a lot of businesses. So again, you carry on doing the NIC and the pension contributions. The government will now only pay 70% of the wages, and the company is liable for the further 30%. Employers will need to top up to 80% or more, depending on what's agreed between them. Okay. From 1st of October, which at this moment in time is the last month of these arrangements, still the same, employers responsible for the NIC and the pension contributions. The government contribution will now reduce to 60%, which is quite a significant drop, okay? And employers will need to top up the 80% or more, depending on what's agreed with the employees. So you can see that although we're talking October, it's really not that far away. I can't believe how quickly the last few months have gone. So companies are really starting to think about this and having a major impact on their future employability, sustainability as well. Ending furlough. One of the key things that we're finding at this moment in time is companies are not really clear as to what to do and how to do the ending of the furlough process. Is actually quite simple. As a business, there are certain steps that you will need to take and you will need to think about before you actually start looking to bring people back. And I'm sure lots of organisations have been looking at contingency planning and return to work planning, etc. But employers should regularly review their furlough arrangements to decide when to bring the furloughed staff back. Now, it could be that they do that in stages, or it could be that they do it bit by bit. But the key things that you've got to think about are which roles and skills are needed in the workplace and when. Should all furlough staff come back at the same time, or should we stagger it? And if we do stagger it, what does that look like? Do some staff have to remain on furlough? For example, when I'm talking about that, I'm thinking about people who have got personal needs, caring responsibilities, or are themselves shielding, or are living with someone who is shielding and they cannot work from home. So there are certain factors that you will need to consider, and the government has allowed for these for you to actually work with. To end the furlough, the employer must give staff notice in writing. But what I would say is have that open verbal dialogue first. The writing part actually comes after you've had this verbal communication with the individuals. We have to remember that these are our employees. There's no actual minimum notice period for furlough, but employers should talk to staff about plans to end furlough as soon as possible. So a bit like a redundancy situation where as soon as you know something's going to be happening, you should really start the consultation process. The same goes here. one of the things you've got to remember is if you do recognise a trade union or you've got employee representatives, etc., they're the people that you would be communicating with, not the individuals direct, but that will all be determined by your own individual organisation. But generally, the key thing here is this open dialogue. You need to talk to them about it. Encourage staff to raise any concerns or problems about returning to work. Granted, there will be those that will try it on. However, in the majority of cases, what you will find is people are actually open and honest, and I'm hoping that there's a good work relationship, and therefore you'll be able to find a way forward. Listen and consider their comments and ideas. We are not the maker and the doer of absolutely everything. Sometimes we miss the obvious, and this is why an open dialogue is usually quite good, because employees can actually suggest alternatives as well. One of the other things that I would say, just before I go on to the next bit, is be open to actually changing arrangements. So if people come back, if it's not quite right, it's not quite working, then review the situation. Don't think just because this is what we've agreed, this is how it's going to have to be. This is a prime opportunity for you as organisations to actually look at what is it we want to achieve and how can we do that, and use this as an opportunity to actually make the business work the way that you need it to work. The way it was working in March or before lockdown may not necessarily be the right way it was always happening. Okay, holidays. So I want to just briefly talk about holidays because there's an awful lot of confusion about holidays, and this hasn't really helped because the government kept moving the goalposts, and there's an awful lot of confusion and uncertainty from individuals as well as companies as to what are the rules and what can I do and what can't I do. So the key thing is the government have introduced a new legislation to allow for the holidays to be carried over. This is over and above what company procedures and contracts already allow for, okay? It basically was an allowance or a situation that the government recognised in order to think, right, okay, in order for businesses to actually be able to cope and respond to the coronavirus pandemic and protect workers from losing their holidays, etc., we need to introduce something new. It enables workers to carry holiday forward where the impact of a coronavirus means it's not been reasonably practicable to take leave in the year that it relates to. So you've got to remember, when they talk about in the leave they refer to, it's your work's holiday year, not the calendar year. So if your holiday year is June to May, fine, that's your work period. If your holiday period is January to December, then that's what you would work on. But don't think it has to be either from lockdown day or a normal calendar year. The rules are, with this new legislation, that a maximum of 4 weeks can be carried forward into the following 2 years. What it doesn't mean is nobody takes holiday whatsoever and that everyone's going to carry over 4 weeks holiday into the next 2 years, because that's just going to be totally unmanageable. And to top that off, if someone does carry over 4 weeks, if someone then leaves your business, they're technically entitled to that money as holiday pay as part of their final pay. Okay, so there's a lot here to think about. One of the other things that you need to think about as well is when calculating how much holiday a worker can carry forward, employers must give workers the opportunity to take the leave. By that, some individuals will want to take holiday. Now, we are in a bit of a double-edged sword because you've got those that are on furlough who technically are sat at home and being paid. And then you've got those that are desperately trying to keep the business running. And they're probably so stretched that they can't and they don't take holidays. So you're in a bit of a difficult situation. But I think with the changes with flexible furlough, etc., it might give you a little bit more flexibility. So what is reasonably practicable? And these are only examples. There will be plenty of others, okay? So things like significant increase in demand for service due to coronavirus. So again, going back to what I said earlier, some are on furlough, some are staying and working. The demand in service or the demand in need for them to do their job increases, and therefore it's not being able for them to take their holiday, that kind of situation. Or, you know, in some organisations, we've needed to now change and diversify, and we're preparing these plastic shields, etc. So our workload has increased because we need to provide it for the NHS, that type of thing. The length of time remaining in the worker's leave year to enable them to take a holiday. So, for example, if your holiday year is, I don't know, August to July, and they've got 3 weeks worth of holiday outstanding, the realistic view of that, for them to be able to come back to work and to take holidays or anything like that, is not going to happen. So in that situation, it would be perfectly reasonable for you to take it. If, however, your holiday year is actually March to February, and you're bringing them back in stages, it's perfectly reasonable for someone to be able to take some holiday, not that it's a given you will be carrying over your full 4 weeks. You've also, and I'm sure this is something that is at the forefront of everyone's mind, is the impact of the company recovery of taking leave and other workforce. So, you know, if oodles of people are actually taking holiday, how's that going to impact on my output? How's that going to impact on the workforce that have to actually continue working? And again, it's a really difficult situation to actually find a balance right now. Okay. Where leave is carried forward, give workers the opportunity to take the holiday at the earliest possible opportunity. So, for example, if your holiday year is January to December, in the new year, if you can identify what technically would be your quieter periods, you can look at trying to stagger holidays. Or you could say to everybody, I need you to take holiday between this date and this date. Remember, under the working time regulations, you are able to insist or to ask an employee to take holiday. The key thing here is that you need to give twice as much notice as the holiday period. So if you want someone to take 1 week's leave, you need to give them 2 weeks leave notice. Okay. One of the biggest changes that we've found with the holiday rules, just before I carry on, don't forget, if people do take holidays, it is based on normal full pay. One of the biggest things that we found with holidays and furloughed workers was, well, they're on furlough. Why would they want to take holiday? Because they're getting paid anyway, and they want to save their holiday. Well, in this sort of situation, you've got to have your business head on. You've got to be more commercially minded. Okay. So the rules, and this is actually from the government website. So I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to break this down. Right. So workers who are on furlough are unlikely to need to carry forward statutory annual leave, as they will be able to take it during the furlough period. And what they do insist is that the company must ensure that they follow the notice periods, which is what I've just talked about, you know, the twice as much notice. And the Gov website does give you some further information on this. The individuals must be paid the correct holiday pay. So basically the employer is making up the difference. Again, there is a holiday pay section on the Gov website, and I would encourage you to go and read that. If the employer is unable to fund the difference, the worker can carry their annual leave forward. This would apply in some organisations where everything's just shut down and the company have got absolutely no money coming in whatsoever. So, for example, I'm thinking not retail, pubs, restaurants, those type of environments. In this situation, the worker must still be given the opportunity to take their annual leave at the correct holiday pay before the carried annual leave is lost at the end of the 2-year period. So the government have actually given some guidance in order for you to be able to manage holidays in a more effective way for those that are furloughed. Okay, some of the HR challenges. I've already talked about these in brief, but these are sort of things that you might have questions about coming forward. So who do we bring back, when and how? Have an open dialogue. I'm hoping that companies have done this anyway, but since someone was put on furlough, that they've kept an open dialogue with staff. It's not work. That won't be considered work. That's just being a good employer. You've got a duty of care and lots of different reasons why you would need to keep in touch with staff. Be fair in the process that you follow and make sure that you're consistent and you follow the fair process for all and you don't favour some and over others. Make sure you've got written agreements of any changes and ensure you keep any of this dialogue or these written agreements for 5 years, because HMRC have been quite clear that they will audit people within a 5-year period. We should think about, can we bring everybody back? And what would that look like? How are we actually going to do it? in certain circumstances, if you are looking to bring everyone back, I mean, that's a brilliant thing. However, how will you actually do that if they're going to come back to the workplace with social distancing, etc.? So I think the argument of if you can work from home, that would carry on. And you would then probably stagger, or you would identify key members of staff who can work from home, or do it on a voluntary basis or a rotational basis or something like that. But there's lots of things there for you to think about. A lot of organisations are fast approaching or have reached this point whereby the business doesn't look anything like it did before March. They know they need to rebuild, etc. However, what does that rebuild look like? It's unlikely that they're going to need all the staff that they employed before the lockdown period. And also, whilst they're rebuilding, they're probably going back 2-3 years. So they're looking at a structure that existed a few years ago, not what it looked like just before the restructure. So you have to remember, regardless of the circumstances that you find yourself in, you've still got to follow the right process and you've got to follow the law. We came across a situation very recently whereby a company didn't follow the redundancy procedures. It's a genuine redundancy situation, given this whole situation that we're in. It is genuine. However, because they didn't follow a fair process or any process at all, they literally just called them in and said, sorry, we've got no jobs. And they've now got a whole ream of unfair dismissal claims on their hand, which seems really unfair, but that's how the law works. The one thing that you've got to remember, although the government have introduced lots of new processes, guidelines, lots of different legislation, etc., normal employment law still exists in the background, and we've always got to revert back to that if there's no clear direction from the government about anything else. And the last thing that I would say here is look out for updates, because we're finding that more and more regular updates are being made to the processes, to the guidelines, etc., by the government. And quite often what happens is the government will update things following feedback through their key communicators. And it's not always sort of publicised very well. You are able to actually sign up to government regular bulletins, which they can do either daily or as they come out, and it's quite useful to have that information because it will pinpoint you to which changes have taken place, and it'll make sure that you're up to date each time. So that's what I wanted to go through. So the key things that I would talk to you about is, yes, you do need to start looking at restarting the company, but there are HR challenges, there are lots of issues that you need to think about. We need to look at rebuilding the business, absolutely given, but we need to be realistic. What is that going to look like? We also need to listen and think about very carefully what the employee needs are, what their concerns are, why are they being resilient, why are they resisting coming back, what difficulties are they facing. A lot of companies were quite relieved when they found out that primary schools were going to go back to school. That clearly didn't work, because that part of that system has been dropped. Only the classes that had been originally announced, they are the only ones going back now. All the others won't be. And then to top it off, I don't know about your cities, but certainly in Leicester, a minimum of 4 schools have had to close because they've had an outbreak. Which doesn't help, because then that means that whole school now is closed. We need to look at protecting employees and others that are coming into the business as well. So I would try to avoid visitors. One of the things that we're hearing a lot from staff is they're happy to come into the workplace, but what about things like the post person or individuals? You know, a lot of companies allow individuals to receive parcels, their own shopping, etc. Can we stop that? Is this type of contact? Andy, who did a health and safety webinar last week, he was talking about leaving the fire doors open, the internal doors, for ventilation, etc. So there's all these different things that you need to be thinking about. Basically, it's all about having a duty of care and being reasonable, practical in what you're doing. The key thing also is that anything that you do has to be in consultation and with agreement with the individuals or your employees. If you try to force something through, you are potentially at risk. One of the biggest issues that we've got at the moment is trying to balance company need and individual need. One of the key areas that we're finding also is certainly single parents. There's a possible indirect sex discrimination issue there, where single parents are having to look after their children. They can't come into work, and we all know that the majority of people that single parents are women. So if we try to force that through, it's something that we're going to need to be careful of. There's an awful lot of talk about staff surveys. I sort of sit on the fence a little bit about that. It really is up to you as a business what you feel is the right way to go about this and how you want to manage this. The key thing for me is the dialogue, open, transparency and consistency, and written agreements. Right, it's gone over more than I thought. Sorry about that. Has anyone got any questions?
Thanks, Emma. That was really in-depth and helpful insight to the changes to the furlough scheme. Yeah, really interesting. Just as I popped in the chat box, guys, if you've got any questions, please submit them via the chat box or raise your hand and I'll come round to you. Emma, I've got just a couple of bits for clarity. I just jotted down some notes. So from the 1st of July, you can do a staggered return of your staff still, so bring some back on part-time while some remain furloughed full-time.
Yes, you can.
Stagger that, yeah.
Yeah.
Great, and then there was just two other bits I wanted clarity for. Just when you were about furloughed staff and holidays, should we be encouraging furloughed staff to take annual leave then while they're on furlough? And then the second part of that question would be, what does an employer do if furloughed staff return, say in September, October, and they've got 4 or 5 weeks holiday?
Okay, so in terms of the furlough and taking holidays, it's not for me to tell a business how to run their business. However, in order for you not to have such a difficult situation when everybody does come back to work, etc., I would encourage companies to start looking at trying to get people to take some holiday whilst they're on furlough. Maybe not all of it, but certainly some. So maybe a week or so, stagger it over a period of time, etc. In terms of if they come back to work and they've got an awful lot of holiday, this is where companies need to look at this realistically. How are we going to manage this? You know, if we start bringing everybody back, let's say at the end of July and August, we've got, and then your holiday year is January to December. You think about that. We've got about 5 or 6 months, well, 5 months to actually get people to start taking holidays. So let's put a process in place whereby we actually say to people, I need you to take this time off, I need you to take this time off. And it's that consistent and simple message that you give to staff. And in some ways, you're not giving them a choice. You are actually saying you are required to take this leave. You need to try and make sure that the minimal number of holiday is carried over from one year to the next. You are allowed under the working time regulations to actually instruct someone to take leave. If they fail to take that leave, then you've also got an argument there to say, no, we gave you every opportunity to take the leave and we instructed it. Here is the dialogue, here is the written information, and therefore you're going to lose that holiday.
And you can instruct them to take leave while they're on furlough? Yes,
because that's in the rules.
Great, thanks. No, appreciate that. Right, we've got 3 questions in the chat box, but Andrew Dennis raised his hand first, so if we can just unmute Andrew, please, Jade, and Andrew's got a question for Hema.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Just on that last point, when you said you can instruct people to take holiday when on furlough, is that right, or is it a question of you can ask people to take holiday? Or can you quite literally instruct them?
Under the working time regulations, it's very clear that an employer can tell people when to take holidays. And if you look at the Gov website, they also say that it's unlikely that they would envisage someone who's been on furlough to have to carry over the 4 weeks, because an employer can make them take the holidays whilst they're on furlough. So it's how you manage that and how you actually apply that. The key thing here is giving them twice as much notice as the leave. So if it's 1 day's leave, it has to be at least 2 days notice. And you've got to make sure they get the right pay as well.
Obviously, like all things, it's better if it's done by consultation rather than instruction, which actually wasn't the question I was going to ask. It was just a comment on your final point. My points are a bit more around the redundancy scheme, because obviously people now are referring to this as the furlough scheme, which actually in the reality of it, it's the job retention scheme, but people have used it because it's a lot easier to refer to as the furlough scheme. What we're picking up is that one or two people are actually, one or two businesses are beginning to utilise it more almost as a pre-redundancy scheme. And my question is, can businesses, can employers start the redundancy or any potential redundancy consultation whilst that member of staff is still on furlough? Or have they got to be actually back at work before the formal consultancy for any potential redundancy kicks in?
You can, yeah, certainly you can start consultation process. You can even make someone redundant whilst they're on furlough. The key thing is that you do follow the right process. Consultation is not seen as work, and we've had confirmation of that quite for a number of months now.
That it from you, Andrew? Great, thank you. Right, come to the questions. I'm going to just go from top to bottom. So one question here, Hema. Would it be reasonable for an employee to request for their furlough leave to be extended due to childcare issues?
Yes, it would be. And that's one of the things that I was talking about earlier, is when we're talking to people about coming back to work and about making sure it's fair. Someone in that situation, if we try to force them back to work, that could potentially be a discrimination claim, especially if it was a female with children. Schools are not going to be going back until September at the earliest, if that.
Right, hopefully that answers the question. Rebecca asks, where do we stand if there's no work for furloughed staff when it's time for them to return?
Then technically that would be a redundancy, wouldn't it? Because a redundancy applies where the job has ended, diminished or ceased. But the government scheme allows you to continue to keep someone on furlough for as long as is necessary. I know the payments, etc., are going to change and the individual companies are going to have to contribute towards it. However, if there's no work for that person, then two options: keep them on furlough, or we have to start looking at redundancies, unfortunately.
Next question from Hannah. Hannah asks, does the holiday and furlough information still apply for staff who are shielding?
Yes, it does. Shielding is a little bit more complicated for holidays, but you can certainly talk to them and see if they're amenable and accepting of that. However, someone who is shielding, or someone who lives with someone who's shielding, or is caring for a vulnerable person, those rules are very specific and they are entitled to certain payments, etc.
Thanks. Got quite a long question here, Hema. I don't know if you can see it. I know it's come to me privately. So,
Okay.
So one of the participants has said, our business has been decimated by the pandemic, and they've got 5 staff, all been with the company a long time. They don't have enough money for redundancy. It had put the business out of business, and then fearful how they could rebuild. Can they ask the affected employees to amend their employment contracts after furlough to drop their hours to maybe part-time, on a permanent basis, part-time, maybe in the future when the business was able to revert back to what it was? I guess that's about pay cuts and different contractual hours and things. Can you change that?
You can't change it unless they agree to it. So certainly you would be speaking to them to try and get their arrangements and their agreement to do that. It'd be really difficult because, like I've said earlier, regardless of the situation that we find ourselves in, normal employment law applies. So if we can't keep them on their existing contracts and they're not in agreement to change it, then they have to be made redundant, and therefore redundancy pay would be applicable. If the company can't pay the redundancy, then they would have to technically look at putting themselves into administration, etc., in order for the individuals to then try to claim the redundancy through the government. This is the really, really sad side of this whole situation, is companies don't want to be in this situation. They certainly don't want to do this. They don't want to lose their business, don't want to lose their staff. But there's only so much the law can do to protect them, both parties.
Rebecca's earlier question about where do they stand if there was no work for furlough staff and it's time to return, just added that they're temp staff on contract for services.
Well, temporary staff, you would technically have that. They would only be there for a short period of time. So there's no reason why, if they're there for a short period of time, so let's say, for example, you've said we'll bring you on board for 3 months, there's no guarantee of future work. So if that work has dried up, then they just leave. Is that the right way? So I can see Rebecca now. Yeah, I just spotted her. Is that fine? Cool.
Thanks, Emma. I think that next question has been answered, which was, can we hold redundancy consultation meetings during furlough leave? You said yes. And final question in the box is, one of the members of staff is refusing to come back to work as he's got to look after his child. His wife's a teacher and key worker, and they don't want to send their child to school, but could do. What can that person do?
Well, the key thing here is can the individual actually work from home? Or the other thing that companies have got to think about is, we're all sort of, we all do it, and I'll put my hand up, I'm the same as well. We've always operated, we will work between this hour and this hour to do the job that we've got to do. In this situation, is it possible for the individual to actually do some hours, maybe outside? So when his partner is back at home or etc., or the child is busy, can they do a few hours here and there? Let's be a little bit flexible in what we're doing and how we're doing it. The other factor here, because we've had a very similar situation with another company, same sort of thing, whereby this gentleman's wife is a school teacher as well, and therefore she's had to go back to school. But what he said is once the school's closed for the summer, then he can come back to work as normal, because obviously they'd already made their childcare arrangements. Regardless of this situation, they would have had to have those arrangements. So this, for me, that question is more about, it's a short-term fix. So try and find a solution the best you can. If they're just being awkward, then that's a different conversation altogether. But technically, you should be able to find a different solution.
Thanks, Emma. Okay, I think we were scheduled to have another 5-10 minutes or so. So last chance to get your questions into Hema. If anybody else wants to raise their hand, give it 30 seconds to see if anything else comes through. Do you want to just recap on the key points to take away then, Hema? Is there anything?
Yeah, sure. So the key points to think about really is that the furlough scheme is changing, and companies do need to carefully think about how that's going to impact on them going forward. It is going to be staggered in terms of its reduction in entitlement, etc. But companies do need to look at it. The companies do also need to look at how they're going to rebuild and return to work and what that will look like. You've got time. Don't rush into jumping straight into redundancies. Really carefully think about, what do we want to do? How can we achieve it, etc. And remember, you've got to follow the law. You can't jump the law just because you're in a really difficult situation. Tribunals will be lenient, or at least we're expecting them to be a little bit more lenient than normal. But if there's a blatant infringement of the law, they're not going to be happy with that, and there will be an awful lot of unfair dismissal claims out there. We want to avoid that where possible.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hema. It's really helpful session this morning. Just to encourage all the chain members on the call to use the Quest services, as I'm sure you probably are, but obviously they're excellent services. So I'm going to wrap it up there. We've not had any other questions come through, Hema, so I'm going to wrap it up. Just want to say a big thanks to Hema and Quest for the last couple of sessions that they've delivered. I'm sure we'll do more with them over the coming weeks and months. Just a reminder that the next joint chamber event is on Monday next week, 9 o'clock. We've got the City Region Business Breakfast. But you've got to make your own breakfast. So that's our popular networking event back next Monday, and they've been going really well. So I hope you all have a good rest of the week. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.